So the substantive part of my talk this morning is about the challenge of implementing sustainability in existing buildings. I'm going to just remind us of the nature of the challenge we face in working with existing buildings to achieve sustainability. And actually I'm going to focus on a subset of that very specifically around achieving low carbon buildings and achieving carbon reduction targets. And then within that, I'm going to take the focus even narrower to the area of my current research, which is about the, if you like, the soft infrastructure of delivering sustainability and carbon reduction in existing buildings, the people who actually carry out the work, and where I believe we are not facing up yet to the challenges of unlocking the potential of people in the construction industry. So that's my intent. It's worth rehearsing very briefly the arguments about why we need to retrofit. And the fundamental two facts to hang on to are that a vast majority, 80% according to 2006 estimates, of our 2050 buildings in the UK are already with us. So while there is amazing, fantastic new build, even if it's absolutely zero carbon, will not achieve the carbon reduction targets that we have committed to under the World Leading Climate Change Act 2008. And the reason this is particularly problematic for buildings is because all buildings in the UK need to be effectively zero carbon, putting aside the debates about what that might actually mean, effectively zero carbon by 2050, because the 80% reduction of carbon required at a national level cannot be achieved in all sectors. So buildings effectively have to be zero carbon to enable some of the other sectors to achieve something less than an 80% reduction. And there are many other objectives driving, changing our existing building stock. The security of energy supply is periodically of great concern to particularly national policymakers, and fundamentally reducing our energy demand is arguably the most effective way of securing supply, because we need to generate and buy in less of the stuff. And also at the very human level, fuel poverty is only heading in one direction, levels of fuel poverty are heading in one direction, and it is currently the wrong direction. Fuel poverty, there's now quite a complicated definition, but the idea that if you're spending more than 10% of your income on energy services, fundamentally keeping warm and fed, then that's a situation of fuel poverty. In Scotland, I mean, some of the numbers in the UK are really shocking. In Scotland, a third of homes are deemed to be in fuel poverty, and that again is increasing. So again, reducing energy consumption, making homes closer to zero carbon, can tackle that situation to some degree. So, and I've put in a couple of pictures there to say that while there is a lot of focus on our older building stock, particularly in Leeds, and the unique situation we have with back-to-backs, actually relatively recent buildings, and I don't know the stats on Granary Wharf, and it is actually already performing at the level that it needs to be in 2050, but my suspicion is that a vast number of the buildings that have been put up within the last decade will still need retrofitting to be zero carbon by 2050. So what's needed, I would suggest, is a full set of responses. Sure, where a lot of the research attention has been focused to date is we need to change demand. We need to look at how people use energy, think about users in households in the context I work in, but also industrial users. How do we change consumption through behaviour? And there's a huge amount, rightly so, focus on energy supply, both on generating energy but also on changing the distribution networks so that we don't lose about 8% between generating and big centralised power stations and flicking a switch on at the wall. But also we need changes in the buildings themselves, so that's retrofit. Changes in the technology is key. An inspiring list from Saint-Gobain about all the things that could be done and that technology will allow us to do in buildings. But technology isn't really the critical problem. Actually getting this stuff installed, and installed so that it functions as intended, I would argue, is a challenge that we're not really facing up to yet. And I'm just going to spend a moment setting out the kind of scope of activities within the construction industry where there is the potential to take on energy retrofit in particular. And there's a fair amount of this segmentation comes from work done by Gavin Killip at Environmental Change Institute in Oxford, who says there's a lot of work, it was done in the preparation for the Green Deal, there's a lot of work on energy efficiency, there's a lot of work over on the right hand side about micro-generation and bringing energy generation closer to home, but actually the bit that we haven't really started to look at is RMI, repair, maintenance, improvement. The idea that actually every time you have a new kitchen installed, a new bathroom installed, even new windows, you convert the loft, you put on an extension, those are all opportunities to take further steps in the retrofit journey. Now in 2008-9, when Gavin first looked at these numbers, he estimated that the opportunity, the economic opportunity associated with working in this area, particularly of improvement, was around £12.5 billion a year. So about half the amount that's spent on building, repair, maintenance, improvement is on this room-by-room approaches. We've got a slightly different, that's area. So there's got a slightly different segmentation, which is behind the paper that's in your pack, that from work that I've been doing recently, and saying that we could partition what needs to be done in buildings, thinking about fabric, thinking about appliances and installed systems, thinking about curtailing or reducing the amount of energy, and then separating out heat and electricity in energy generation. And actually the numbers involved here are still around the spend on these kind of measures through repair, maintenance and improvement, rather than directly focused on energy efficiency, because that's the primary goal, remain at around £11 billion a year. So there's a significant market to go at, particularly compared with the kind of funding that was put through the regulated schemes, for example, for energy efficiency, the SEARCH scheme, where energy suppliers were, or energy retailers were involved in energy efficiency. In its last year, that spent £800 million a year. So comparing the 800 million, that's the regulated stuff, with the potential of changing what happens in the £11 billion worth of construction activity, I would say it's a significant opportunity. Okay, so this is the first slide where I was focused more on the content than the headings. And we've got some really, I wanted to bring people, I guess, into the equation. So in the academic literature, we start to talk about the middle out actors, the installers as people who can influence maybe policy to some degree, but certainly implement whether or not technology makes a difference. In the innovation of diffusion literature, we talk instead about intermediaries, and Roger's kind of comprehensive tome setting out all the approaches to innovation diffusion kind of make an assumption that intermediaries always promote an innovation. And I'm not sure that is actually the case. And then most recently, the UK Energy Research Centre has started asking questions about who are the incumbents of the existing energy system, and how do we shift the values and behaviours of the incumbents. And I think really when they set that out, what was in their mind was a very engineering-led approach about the incumbents being the people who run distribution systems and power generation, but actually the soft infrastructure involves a lot of incumbents in how the system operates at the moment. And I guess the point I want to make in research that I've been doing and that's represented in the paper, these are real people, these are busy people, and these are connected and very skilled people. In fact, these people are Danny, John and Ken, and they are people who work in our homes. So not every day of the year, but as all the time they're working in people's homes and changing our surroundings, how they do that, how they communicate with us, what they advise us is the right thing to do, what they do in terms of handover, has a huge impact on the energy consumption in homes. So the really small operators of the energy system, the installers, of whom, let's not forget, there are many. My interpretation of for some other research I've been doing recently, I was looking at the 2013-14 construction industry stats, and it looks as though certainly over 300,000 people are involved in domestic retrofit work in the construction industry in firms of 10 people or less. And actually 75,000 of those are sole traders. So there are a lot of people who are having the influence in energy consumption in existing buildings and who can influence change in existing buildings. But we have a problem with thinking about what's called white van man, the sole traders. You know, this is from November 2014, the cover of The Week, after an ill-judged tweet and the resulting furore, where white van man is a derogatory term rather than being a recognition of the preferred mode of transport of people who need to shift kit around a variety of urban situations. So that, we've got a lot of baggage to deal with about recognising the value and potential and working with that group of individuals. Again, the major part, focusing now on the particular research interests in the paper, I try to set out when do these intermediaries, when do the small and medium enterprises really make a difference in retrofit. At the moment, their influence is greatest at the outset of a process around identifying options and selecting options. For most repair, maintenance and improvement work, there's no architect involvement. So the expertise about the measures taken sits with these very small businesses installing technologies. And actually the potential to make a difference around commissioning and critically post-commissioning is very rarely available or followed through, because there's no incentive to kind of stay on a job unless something goes wrong, and then you have to get called back and it starts costing you money. So that means you're very risk averse about doing new stuff, because there's no incentive to actually learn how to do things differently and move them forwards. And one of the things that comes out of this is that the skills that are needed to be effective in this space are not only technical skills. In the same way as the technology is not at root the real problem in achieving change, having the technical skills is only part of the problem. And certainly in the research that I did for my doctorate a couple of years ago, the most important thing that, according to the people who were having new heating systems installed in, that the heating engineer had in his van, was actually the Hoover, and whether or not he cleaned up after himself and whether they felt their home was respected through the process. That made a huge difference both to their attitude towards the new system and their willingness to learn how to do things differently, for example, if they had a heat pump system installed and the like. So, we are entering into different territory for these people. And again, this is from a paper that I had in Energy Policy last year. We propose that you can actually think about the capacities needed for the individuals in this sector in a way that goes beyond the technical, which is at the top of the list there, and looks at their adaptive capacity. Can they tailor their approach to the specific context? Whether or not they have the personal capacity to see things through, why they're doing work, that does affect the advice they offer, and what happens after installation and their investment in that. So in summary, and I might actually leave it with this out, but the challenge of implementing sustainability, my focus is around low carbon transitions in existing buildings, is yes, creating demand and all the user stuff, yes, developing supply and thinking about low carbon generation and distribution, but also about achieving effective retrofit and achieving, and I think this is the big challenge, a step change, a massive change, all our buildings in the UK virtually zero carbon by 2050. But doing that in the grain of how we change our buildings at the moment, which is incrementally, room by room. Somehow we need a street by street, town by town, settlement by settlement change, and we have to achieve that on a room by room basis, which brings into focus a highly fragmented, highly invested, often risk-averse group of actors. And I think there's a really interesting challenge to engage with, support and develop that group of actors going forwards. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.